Dear members of the press, welcome to the technical press briefing for the International Energy Agency's 7th Annual Global Conference on Energy Efficiency. I am Merve Erdil, Media Relations Officer at the Communications and Digital Office at the IEA. I am joined today by Mr. Kim Fausing, CEO of Danfoss, Dr. Anders Hoffmann, Deputy Permanent Secretary of Denmark's Ministry for Climate, Energy and Utilities, and Dr. Brian Motherway, Head of the Energy Efficiency Division at the IEA. Today we will start with an introduction by Mr. Fausing, continue with Mr. Hoffmann, who will talk about energy efficiency and why it is important, especially during this time. And then Mr. Motherway will present some key highlights from the IEA's new report on the value of urgent action on energy efficiency. Please kindly note that all of the remarks made during this briefing today will be under embargo until 6 a.m. tomorrow, Paris time. We will then have time for a Q&A. Please state your name, your media organization while addressing your questions to the speakers. And the total time of this technical briefing today will be about 1 hour. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Mr. Fausing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon, and also from us a very warm welcome. We have to apologize for not organizing better weather, but we can still hope over the next few days it'll be better. But a warm welcome to this conference. I would like, of course, to thank you all for being here. It's exciting that we now start to see energy efficiency being really priority number one in decarbonizing globally. And therefore, why are we now here? In all the places we could have been in, why not a lot of all the known big capital cities around the world? And I think the answer is quite simple. First of all, if we look at energy efficiency becoming a cornerstone in the energy transition, I think if we look at Denmark as an example, we have set very ambitious targets for the 70% reduction until 2030. Work ongoing. If we look at Sonderborg, where we are here today, very clearly seeing is believing. I think the time where we meet and get confirmed that energy efficiency and climate transition is important is moving now to action, and we need action. And therefore, I think we are at the right place here today. We have in Sonderborg here what we call Project Zero, which is really an exciting project because we have a public-private partnership where we have really been moving the needle over the last few years. So we have now reduced our carbon footprint in Sonderborg with more than 50%, 52%. Still, surely the easiest part, but still 50% since 2007. And we have now the sail set up for 2029, where we believe we can decarbonize the city through this great partnership. So Project Zero with this target is really, setting the platform and showing why energy efficiency should be our priority number one going forward. We take our own medicine, and we have many strong cases here to show the way. So priorities here is priority number one is energy efficiency. It is to point one, so use less energy. Two, use the energy we have already produced that is available in data centers or supermarkets, wherever it is. And the residual, we make it green. That's the three core priorities where we could take action today. And I think these days is really a great opportunity to actually also get out of the conference center and out and see some of these great examples that I have just mentioned in real life. The fact is, they're the right things for the climate. The fact is, it helps to curb energy and energy prices and energy consumption. And the fact is, it's actually good business with very short payback times. And I hope that we can go out, and many will go out and see these examples out there around us. And just to mention a few examples, call it a teaser if you want to. It's all here in Sønderborg. So one, if you would like to see a low-emission construction site, actually 10 minutes from here, we can show you what does a low-emission construction site look like for the future. Or do you want to have climate-friendly living? Then 10 minutes from here, you can also go and see it. Or third, if you would like to see what I'm representing directly, the 250,000 square meter main campus for the Danfoss headquarters, where we have manufacturing, we have R&D, we have technology development, admin, and everything. We will be carbon neutral with the end of this year in our scope 1 and 2. And what have we done? Priority 1, driving energy efficiency. 2, using excess heat or excess energy in the system, so reuse energy, and then make the residual green. That's the 3 things we are doing, and we are doing it all with 2 to 3 year payback time. So if you think about it, our heating system for this big campus, we have reduced 70% of the heating we use on the site. First of all, energy efficiency. So the residual, half of that is today covered by using the excess heat from our manufacturing processes, from our data center, and from our climate and air conditioning systems. And that can be done, and it's all with 2 to 3 year payback time. So in times where we call for action and call for really making a difference by going out and doing it, I think energy efficiency is really the core area and the right place to go for if you really want impact. So all these examples are here, and I really hope everybody takes the opportunity to go out and see it and help us to really move energy efficiency up to a first priority, alongside, of course, creating more green, renewable energy. But just for me to bring the link to also an event here recently in Denmark, which we were very pleased to see, the Esbjerg Agreement, where there's a big cooperation between Denmark, Germany, Holland and Belgium on building significantly more wind power, actually making the North Sea a big, you could say, energy hub for Europe. We think that's really great and the right way to go, but it's also a long delivery time. It takes us 10 years plus before we get the impact. Energy efficiency we can do now. We have the vast majority of the technology we need, and it's really going and getting it done. So in a moment, I'm sure Brian, he will talk much more about this because he has a lot of exciting findings to share. We have said this actually for a long time, but it's really great to see the survey and the work that IEA has been doing also here. So surely IEA is one of the most trusted and professional entities that helps us to develop this globally, and therefore it's exciting, and it really shows, and I'm not revealing anything, I hope, Brian, by saying that energy efficiency is really essential for delivering a net zero going forward, and I hope you will see the big opportunity that it is, and short payback time. So I'm not a politician at all, but having the chance to deliver on the Paris goals really demands that we move on energy efficiency. Curbing the energy situation like we see now means moving on energy efficiency, and therefore I could not imagine personally a better timing, also if it's built on a situation that nobody foresaw, that we have suddenly a huge energy crisis based on the Ukrainian-Russian war. But I think that's clear to all, and with that I just want to conclude by give you a very warm welcome now to Sønderborg. We really look forward to interact with everybody here, and I think if we can achieve together to create the deeper understanding of why energy efficiency is as important and short-term even more important than renewables, I think we will get this moving at a much higher speed. So with that, I will pass on the torch to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and also from my side, welcome to Denmark, welcome to Sønderborg. I have the pleasure of representing the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utility today, being a co-organizer of the next few days event, together with, of course, IEA and with Danfoss as close cooperators. If I should just start by giving you some context and some purpose. I mean, why are we actually doing this conference, and why now? Well, I mean, clearly, as was just mentioned, I mean, the Russian invasion has basically destroyed world energy markets. You have seen price spikes that you couldn't dream about. I mean, just take a walk in town, look at the price of the gasoline. So the cost for consumers have dramatically increased, but also the risk of not being supplied. So there's also a great impact on the risk of these markets. So both cost and risk have gone up dramatically. So that's one of the basic reasons why this is important. The second one is, of course, as was just mentioned by Kim Fausing, that if you want to deliver on the goals from the Paris Agreement, energy efficiency is extremely important tool, simply because it can reduce the problem. It's much, much easier to build renewable energy if you have to build less, so that you both have the current crisis and you have the Paris Agreement. So in that way, when we look at it from our side, we do see that energy efficiencies, I think now on my slide I called it a super green super weapon. I mean, you can use whatever phrase you want, but the main point is that it does deliver on both of these issues. And therefore, we do think that it's extremely important to have this being highlighted again and again, especially among politicians and ministers that can actually do something about it, that can act. And the problem with a lot of energy efficiency is that it's an extremely complicated thing to do because you have to do so many things. But the good news is that all of these things, as we just heard, make sense from an economic perspective by themselves. So it's something that we need to show. And we do also believe that if you do it, you can do it now, and you can also, in the process, create a lot of nice jobs. So let's just, if I should have some kind of, not a formal definition, but when we talk about energy efficiency in context of this, I mean, of course, it does basically mean that you use less energy to do the same thing. But we also try to sort of look at it in a bit broader perspective. So we have these three types of case studies you will see. I mean, the first one is that, of course, you can just use less energy. So some of the examples that was just mentioned, this is just about reducing the total amount of energy you use for a given or specific task. But we also will show some of the examples that are now where you actually shift the type of energy you use. I mean, if you look at houses, I mean, quite a lot of people would burn oil or gas to heat their house. It's much more effective, much more efficient to use heat pumps. So it's shifting from one type of fuel to another type of fuel is also very much part of energy efficiency and something that we'll be highlighting during the next couple of days. And then thirdly, the new, what do you call it, boy in the class or whatever the term would be, is digitalization. Because given that we will now have more and more of energy being produced by renewable energy, you will also see bigger swings in the supply of energy. So energy efficiency is not so much about how much you use, but also when you use it. So shifting demand for energy over time, or making sure that you use it when it's cheaper, is also a way to make the use of energy much more effective. So these three main categories will be the one that we'll be showing you in the couple of days, especially when you go around now in looking at the case studies. Just a few points on the program for tomorrow. Of course, we will have the opening plenary, where we'll discuss the findings that you will hear from Brian Motherway in a few minutes. What are the value of early actions? Why do we need to do something now? What's the benefit of that? Then you will have the two breakout sessions. One would be in this beautiful room, effective cooling for global development, and a focus on consumers and citizens. Of course, cooling is one of the most biggest growing areas, so we need to be very effective. What kind of standards can we use for that? But also the focus on consumers. I mean, a lot of the energy efficiency things, we need as consumers to act or be part of the solution. So how can we engage that? Of course, we'll be talking about finance, and we'll be talking about innovation after lunch. So those would be sort of the key drivers, finance and innovation. Then we'll all join together for the 2 last panels, and that's really about how can you accelerate the policy implementation, because some of the results that you will see from Brian will really show the benefits of that acceleration. But we will also try to sort of put it up and put it into the context of the COP negotiation. Why is this also important to reaching the Paris Agreement, and how can we see it in that context? That would be the last panel. Tomorrow we'll have, or no, not the day after that, we'll have 2 parallel things. I mean, for IEA ministers and other ministers, they will have the energy efficiency ministerial meeting. We will have some nice discussion about what to do, have some nice statements coming out of that, and parallel to that, you'll have the Energy Efficiency Solutions Summit, which we are organizing together with the Danish Federation of Industries and State of Green. So that will be what they will see. So I think that would be my introductory remarks to give you an overview of energy efficiency, why we need to talk about it now, and something that will happen over the next few days. And with that, I will hand over the floor to Brian, who will be giving you the results that we are looking forward to. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Anders, and thank you, Kim. And thank you to all our Danish friends for welcoming us so warmly here in Sunderberg. Despite the weather, it's a lovely town. We're getting to see a little bit of it, and we've been received very warm-heartedly, and we're grateful for that. And we're grateful to you both and to all of your colleagues for the great collaboration generally, but specifically now on the 7th Annual Global Conference on Energy Efficiency, which couldn't be more timely. As my colleagues have said, sometimes when we talk about energy policy, what comes to mind is a wind turbine or an oil rig or something that's generally about where we get our energy from. And sometimes either in the general public or even in policymakers, we don't tend to think so much about how energy is used. And that's a lost opportunity in terms of where we can make savings, where we can reduce our emissions, reduce costs for consumers. And here in June 2022, it's particularly pertinent. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, of course, primarily we've seen a humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, but we've also seen a global energy crisis as a result of Russia's actions. And it's biting all around the world in terms of higher prices, volatility, but particularly here in Europe, many questions about where we're going to get our energy from, how people will be able to stay warm in the coming winter, how economies can continue to be driven, and what policies can address those concerns. And energy efficiency is really at the front of that. And over the next couple of days, we'll be talking about 2 questions relating to energy efficiency, why and how. And that's why it's really appropriate that we're here in Sunderberg, because we really focus, as Kim said more than once, on action, what actually works on the ground. We'll see some great solutions in the town and in the region, and we'll see what really can happen when a focus is put on energy efficiency. And for all of the ministers and senior officials coming, they want to know that that can be done, and they want to know what they need to do to make it happen in their countries and regions. So it's really about ministers and officials and decision makers and CEOs learning from each other on what really works on the ground. But before we get to that, we'll be talking about the why question, and that's what I want to talk to you about now, because with the kind collaboration of our Danish colleagues, we in the IEA have been looking at our energy global models and focusing on energy efficiency to tell you some new findings to launch tomorrow morning as part of the conference, to let you know exactly why early action on energy efficiency is so important. And let me start by saying the way we measure progress in energy efficiency is to say how much energy does it take to produce a unit of GDP in the global economy. So how much energy does it take to power our economy? We call that energy intensity. And over the last few decades, I want to start by emphasizing that we have been making positive progress. Each year, we become a bit better at extracting more value from the energy we use. In fact, in the past decade, we've been improving by about 2% a year, give or take some perturbations, including during COVID. But broadly speaking, each year, we extract 2% more economic value from the energy that we use. And that's positive progress. That means emissions are lower than they would otherwise be, costs are lower than they otherwise would be, investment needs are lower. But If we look forward to the future, we know that energy efficiency can and must do a lot more. Now, many of you will be familiar with the IEA's net zero energy scenario for 2050, where we see how the world can get to a net zero emissions energy system by 2050. There's more than one way to get there, and governments will make their own choices, but our scenario plots out the many, many actions that governments will have to undertake and societies will have to undertake if they want to deliver on the goals, which they have been making over the last year. The vast majority of the world is now committed to net zero by 2050 or thereabouts, and therefore our job as supporting governments is to show them how that can be done. And it's not easy. It requires a lot of actions on the demand side, on the supply side, in every sector, in the way we produce energy, the way we use energy. It requires exploiting existing technologies. It requires exploiting new technologies. The first thing to say is that even at the point we are at now, the energy efficiency progress that I mentioned has really made a difference. So in the last 20 years, global emissions related to energy have been rising. We all know that. That's why we're here. We're concerned about the rising emissions. But I want to tell you, first of all, that were it not for the progress in energy efficiency in the last 2 decades, emissions would have actually risen by twice as much as they have in the last 20 years. And the question is, what can they do in the next period? And the answer is that between now and 2030, we're focused on the short term, that more than a third of the total emissions abatement that we see in our net zero model come from energy efficiency and related demand side measures. So it really is first and foremost in turning the curve away from emissions growth and into lowering our emissions. In fact, we know that just looking at technologies that are available today, and most of which are already fully cost effective, we can very quickly double our annual rate of improvement of energy intensity, go from the current rate of 2% to 4%. Now, if we deliver that 4%, where do we get to by 2030? Well, first of all, the total amount of energy the world uses in 2030 is 95 exajoules lower than it would otherwise be. I have no idea what an exajoule is, never mind what 95 of them are, but let me tell you, that's how much energy China uses today. So the difference on the table for 2030 between a world where we push on energy efficiency and where we don't is the global energy use of China could be avoided and the associated emissions of over 5 gigatons of CO2. So that's what's on the table for us to capture over the next 8 years if we really focus on energy efficiency. That's the climate dimension, but let's not forget the energy security dimension, which is really on people's mind right now. And if we do deliver all of efficiency's potential in the next 8 years, if we really push all the policy buttons, all the action buttons that we need to on energy efficiency and related measures, we could be reducing the amount of oil we use in 2030 by 30 million barrels a day compared to what we would otherwise be using. That's three times Russia's production in 2021. And we could be reducing global natural gas consumption by 650 BCMs in 2030. And again, that's 4 times what the European Union imported from Russia in 2021. It's no coincidence that I'm using these comparators for us to understand really how vital energy efficiency is for the energy security questions that we're facing here today in Europe, but also more widely. I mentioned at the start that one of the key pressures now that we're all feeling as individuals, as families, as societies, and of course governments are feeling is the pressure on energy consumers, whether in our homes, in our businesses, in our daily lives, because of the very, very high cost of energy. A lot of people are struggling to afford their energy bills, and of course it's having a significant impact on enterprise around the world as well. If we drive energy efficiency and deliver its potential for the rest of this decade, the difference in economic terms is that just householders, I'm not even counting businesses and wider here, just householders will have energy bills that are lower to the tune of $650 billion in 2030 alone. That's how much is available for householders to save if their homes are more efficient, their cars are more efficient, their appliances are more efficient. If we as societies collectively drive towards a higher efficiency model and we really deliver on the urgent action required to drive energy efficiency, this is the prize that's available. So this gives you a flavour of the numbers we're going to launch tomorrow. I think you've all seen a preview of the report. We're very happy to discuss it, and we're very happy that we've collaborated with our Danish partners to launch this tomorrow to really remind us why we're here, why so many people from over 60 countries around the world have travelled here to Sunderberg to really understand how we can push forward energy efficiency, and this is the reason why we're doing it. So thank you very much for your time, and we're very happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you to all three speakers. I would like to invite you once again to the floor to start our Q&A. We have about 20 minutes. We will be taking questions in threes. Please state your name and your media when addressing your questions to the speakers. And I'd like to invite you to the floor, please. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you go.
Yep. Please raise your hand so that we can pass the mics to you. I see a hand over there.
Hi,
we can start.
Nicholas Kromeyer, Euractiv. Just to clarify, we're talking about all of these savings that you just outlined, the 650 billion US dollar, etc. in summary. So this is plus, plus, plus if the described energy savings are achieved. Just to clarify, I'm not 100% correct. And then the proposal or the increase in energy efficiency that you're asking for essentially entails a doubling rate up until 2030 of the annual energy efficiency improvements, right? To just clarify that as well. And then lastly, let's look at the toolkits that you're outlining. Can you just specifically clarify the 3 key measures in the building sectors that you're proposing, where I presume to be the largest share of gas savings possible? Thank you.
We can take one more question if there are any on the floor. Okay, no questions. Maybe Brian, would you like to address some of these questions?
So to clarify, yes, everything you said is spot on, which is basically if we look at 2030 and we look at 2 possible worlds, one where we do nothing more on energy efficiency and one where we do everything that we know is possible, and all of those numbers relate to the difference between those 2 worlds in 2030. Because if we do take all these actions, the kind of solutions that we've been talking about, then we can double the rate of progress and we can deliver all of those numbers. In terms of the measures possible, I'm sure that the colleagues will have views on this as well, but in terms of when we look at a policy toolkit, we think about what kind of regulatory measures really drive it. You ask for examples in buildings. So, you know, if you build a new home in Europe today, it uses about a quarter of the energy of a home would have a couple of decades ago, because building energy codes mean that we're building much better buildings in terms of more insulation, better windows, better heating equipment. So regulation through building codes has really driven it. Secondly, though, we need to go back to a lot of those old buildings and we need to what we call retrofit them. And that's where incentives can be really important, because you maybe support financially people to do the investments. There's often upfront investments needed to change your insulation, change your heating system, but you save later. So governments often offer supports to help citizens afford that and then get the savings over time. And thirdly then is information, because most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about how much energy they use. If they're thinking about buying a house, nowadays there's a label to say this one will cost you a lot less to run than this one. If they're thinking about how much energy they're using today, maybe they have a smart meter telling them, you know, how much it's costing them to run all their appliances. So that combination of some regulatory measures to drive improvements, incentives to help people take the right action, and information to help people understand what they're doing really is where, when governments have a mixture of all of those policies, that's when we see the most action happening.
Sorry.
Which share of the 650 BCM do you think will be achieved through the proposed toolkit in the building sector?
So just to answer really quick, that's focused on householders. So the bulk of those savings are from buildings. I can get you the exact numbers. It's also, there's some from the transport. So basically when we think about when householders spend money, we think about them living in their homes and also commuting to work and things like that. So we're not talking here about industry or public buildings and things like that. We'll get you that breakdown.
There's another question over there, please.
Okay, I'm Dmitry Litvinenko. I'm TV journalist from Ukraine. It's a national TV channel STB called, and I have some question. We see how 1 month the government tried to make some some decision about the oil embargo. And if I understand you right, you said that we can make this embargo 3 times if we would think about energy efficiency. 3 times about oil and 4 times about the gas. A little bit wider about this, and also about the price of this energy efficient solution. Because, you know, in the country where, like Ukraine, it's difficult to tell people that they need to invest to their own buildings, for example, because, you know, the prices of energy subsidized by the government like this, yeah? I understand that in Denmark, everything is market, everybody understand, and it's as you say, payback will be very, very quickly. But in some country, in Hungary, that don't want, for example, make some cutting for the oil industry like this, what we shall do with such country, not with the, you know, the best like Denmark. What we will do with this country, because this we called about the global action. Okay, so triple embargo for oil, Russian oil, it's very interesting, and the money and the prices of these energy efficiency solutions.
Okay, thank you. So
First question about triple embargo solution, right? So and about the
experience of Denmark, maybe too. So maybe we start with Mr. Motherway, and then we continue maybe with also the experience of Denmark, maybe with Mr. Hoffman.
So if we do everything on efficiency by 2030, the amount of oil we'll be saving globally is 3 times the production of Russia in 2021. Of course, all that doesn't happen in Europe, and it doesn't happen overnight. So the challenges for Europe still remain in terms of getting out of Russian oil as quickly as possible, which of course is the intent of so many European countries right now. It can be done. But it doesn't happen overnight, and of course our figures are global. But you're absolutely right to say it costs money. Energy efficiency classically is about investing something now and saving money over time. Whether I'm thinking about in my home or we're thinking about societies as a whole and our infrastructure, you invest in better technology, you invest in better systems, and it pays for itself over time, but there's still a barrier in terms of being able to invest. So in fact, we have a panel tomorrow focused on finance, because we're talking about this can't all fall on governments. The scale of finance can't all be paid for by governments. So we'll be hearing, for instance, from private sector actors, multilateral development banks. And you're right that in many countries, the question is affordability to citizens. We see some very good schemes right across Europe and beyond, where either at a national government level or a city government level, grants and subsidies are available, or, you know, schemes where you pay back over time. But it's absolutely a key issue for energy efficiency action, and that's why it's a real focus of the conference over the next couple of days.
And maybe Dr. Hoffman or Mr. Fausing would like to speak about, you know, Denmark's experience.
Yep. Let me start out, and I'm sure Anders he will supplement. But to the question of the competitiveness, and then of which solution can you use where. I think Danfoss, we are a global player today. We are very active all over the world, and of course the way things look is slightly different depending on which region that you're in. But the vast majority of many of the technologies today that we can apply driving efficiency in the energy system are with quite short payback times if you compare to what it takes to build renewable infrastructure. And I can just take on one example that I think it was mentioned by Anders. If you look at the heat pumps, where you are electrifying, in principle, the heating systems, at least if your source is the right and you are building up more green energy, you will get out 3 to 1 energy what you put into a heat pump. So it's significantly more efficient, and it has relatively short payback times. The same if, you know, in the mix you have district energy, district heating, which many countries have today. It's an excellent way to drive efficiently in the energy system. And there's so much technology today that helps to do it with shorter payback time. And therefore, the cases we have also done here, that we can show, we have twin cases to those that shows how is this in other countries with a very different footprint than Denmark has.
If I should just supplement, I think you're completely right. I mean, the finance issue is one of the key challenges. I think two things that I would emphasize. I mean, one of the things that, for instance, we're trying to do in Denmark is really try to do sort of cooperation with banks, given that they are the one that would be lending the money. So saying that we have a sort of a cooperation with them, that if you're sort of a citizen and you want to do something green, the banks would sort of give you a lower rating or sort of lower interest rates or do something. So there's quite a lot of you can do with the private sector. And the other ones are the one that Brian is talking about, where you have these bigger business models, where you have pension funds coming in and renovating entire blocks using much more advanced equipment and really lowering the cost of living in those buildings. So the finance is key. So yeah, so join us tomorrow for that section.
Okay, so
Hi.
there is a question in the back part of the room, and there's another question here, and two questions, in fact, in the front rows. So we can start with your question, and then two other questions here towards the front, please.
One. Yeah, my name is Christoph Johann. I'm from Germany. I'm working for various news media. And my question is, today we are talking about energy efficiency and improving the energy efficiency, which is the subject of this conference. But on the long term, my question is, which role can play hydrogen? So as far as we know, hydrogen is very inefficient in its production. At the moment, you lose 75% of the energy you use for it. And which role under this perspective can play hydrogen on a longer term when we look onto our energy future?
Thank you. There was another question. We can actually take the other two questions from there was one. Can we?
Hi.
Okay.
My name is Herman Trebisch. I work for outlets in the United States, Utility Dive and California Current. It's a two-part question that are related. Both questions are related. Do you have strategies for addressing the commercial industrial sector and the residential sector? Because those are very different kinds of consumers. So I'm wondering if you have specific strategies for each. And the second part of the question is that in the residential sector, there have been some real successes, but they're generally fairly small scale, and a lot of indication that customers are not necessarily entirely cooperative until they have access to certain kinds of technologies and prices, devices, strategies. And I'm wondering if you have approaches to expanding the technologies that are needed, the prices, devices kind of strategies, or technologies that are needed.
Okay, I think there's another question here, and then we can do another round.
My name's Cecilia. I'm with Business Green. You've pointed to some sort of, you said, good policies that have sort of played a role in moving forward this agenda. But I would quite like to get a sense from you guys about what you feel the state of policy within Europe or even further afield is on energy efficiency, and potentially what you think the major barriers are, or things holding governments back from being more ambitious on this front, essentially.
Okay, so maybe first on the... Yes.
Okay, all great questions. So first of all, on hydrogen, I mean, hydrogen is really important, especially its costs need to come down. It needs to become more efficient. But if you look at subsequent decades beyond the 2020s, in our global net zero scenario, we see hydrogen really important, particularly in some key sectors such as hard to abate heavy industry and other sectors. Any supply side solution is cheaper and more feasible if our global energy system is more efficient. And that's why we describe the IEA energy efficiency as the first fuel, because the amount of wind turbines you'll need, the amount of wires you'll need to move that electricity around, the amount of hydrogen you'll need will all be lessened by us using it more efficiently at the end use. And therefore it'll reduce investment costs and it'll reduce earning costs. But hydrogen is really important in that context. I think the point about the difference between policies for consumers in our homes and in industrial public buildings is really correct, and in the policy toolkit you'll see we've addressed these somewhat differently. In terms of small-scale customers and progress there, I don't think I'd agree that we haven't seen that much success. Certain programs, utility-led programs and kind of project-led programs have sometimes found it hard to get traction, I think because there aren't that many people in the world as excited about energy efficiency as the three of us maybe, but we have to recognize that. But on the other hand, a lot of policies working in the background, such as regulation, has really made a difference. And let me give you a US example, which is if you buy a white good today, a refrigerator or a television or an air conditioner, it's using half the electricity to run than the equivalent device was 2 or 3 decades ago, and yet it's costing less to buy like for like. And that's because efficiency improvements have been driven by regulation that have driven basic standards up, pushed the market towards better technologies. Consumers are gaining hugely, and the environment is gaining hugely. It's completely invisible. I mightn't even know it's happening, but I'm benefiting from it. And that relates to the question about good policies. You know, I do think I wouldn't underestimate how important standards have been for driving more efficient cars, more efficient homes, more efficient washing machines, all that kind of thing. But I do feel that most countries are not ambitious enough on energy efficiency. And we will be debating over the next couple of days why that is. Why isn't there more of a focus? I think sometimes energy policymakers think about the supply side because, as I said earlier, when we think about energy, we think about the source of energy. We tend to forget about how we use it. And as Anders very wisely said, it can be harder to tackle the demand side because if I'm an energy minister, I can pass a law that says let's have more wind energy or let's build out the grid or whatever. But if I want to tackle energy efficiency, I'm talking about housing policy, industrial policy, education policy. So one thing that we've been pushing for the last couple of years, the IEA, since we produced some policy recommendations as we're doing all the time, is that energy efficiency needs a whole of government response. You really need alignment from the top down involving many ministries. I would say that 5 years ago, getting a whole of government excited about energy efficiency was not a particularly bankable prospect. But in the last couple of years, driven by the global focus on net zero, firstly, and secondly, the crisis we find ourselves here in the middle of 2022 means that there's no better time to really drive a coherent, strong, whole-of-government response to energy efficiency, and that's what we'll be discussing for the next couple of days.
Thank you, Dr. Motherway. Do you have any addition?
Please. If I maybe just pick up your Brian's last point, I think one of the more effective things that we've been doing in Denmark was when a couple of years ago, when we were doing sort of the reform of social housing, we were working quite closely with the Minister of Housing, and we managed to sort of get the way that you improve new projects in social housing, you have to have energy efficiency as part of that. So it was a sort of a small change in regulation in another ministry, but it had a huge impact on energy efficiency in the Danish building sector. So I mean, this is just one example of that you really need to have this looking across. Then on hydrogen, I think actually we are now, when we talk about hydrogen, is now actually one of the reasons why we get more interested in energy efficiency, because we need to use so much energy to produce the hydrogen. So we really need to make sure that we use it in an effective way. And then on the housing, I think two things. I mean, this whole thing about that you can have schemes that help people to do it. But also I think one of the key things, and I also mentioned that, was this whole idea about digitalization. I mean, how can you make sure that the data are available not only for the consumer but also for industry to be able to use that to have product that would help you save without you having to do the trouble. So they will turn off your whatever they will turn off and turn it on again when it's more effective. So this whole thing that you can use digitalization to interact with whatever is in your house, I think is one of the key components of the future.
Thank you. Yes.
I just add to this because I think it's a very good question. So it's also clear just to what Brian said, that the cooperation in the local city or whatever it is super important, and we can see it here. So of course it has to do with regulation, having the right incentives, and that has to be in place. But it's also about that we work together. So what we hope to be able to discuss over the next few days is to get inspired here, where we have a live case, where we are way ahead of those targets, what we talk about here, by really working together across the public and private sector, doing the right things, actually seeing that it's a lot of good business doing this. It makes the region more competitive, it makes the region more attractive, and for us as an industrial being here, we also can see that it is a lot about getting inspired and understanding. And that's why we really full support, and we are also into hydrogen, and we also support hydrogen in the long term. But I think there is also a tendency for us right now to talk about all the long-term things with heavy investments. What is more important right now, getting moving today on action, on things that actually makes a difference today and tomorrow, not to waste the next few years. That's why we are really convinced that we can get a good experience exchange over the next 2-3 days to see some of those examples that's applicable in many places in the world.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one final round of questions. There is a question in the back of the room here, and then another question here, please, if we can pass the...
Is this on? Okay, brilliant.
And then, actually, one more in the very front row. So, we can start with your question.
Hi, Alex Phillips, Daily Express from London. Just picking up on one of the statistics that you mentioned in the briefing, the 650 billion saved by 2030. I just did some quick fag packet maths, and that works out around about $76 per head, presuming population numbers, which comes across as a bit of a drop in the ocean for consumers, to my mind, given that, you know, in 2022, in the UK, for instance, most people's energy bills have gone up to $2,000 a year. So I just wondered how you're going to convince people that you know, they should make this change now for a small gain in 8 years' time, when they're probably more focused on immediate concerns. And something that you mentioned in answer to the last question was needing a whole government response. Is that possibly why governments have been so sluggish to act on energy efficiency, because it's just too hard to sell to the voter?
Thank you. We will take the... please, yes.
Hi, Nuran Erkul from Anadolu Agency, Turkey. My question is on the investment part. What is the required amount of investment globally to lower the consumption 5% in 8 years, as stated in the report? And what are the breakdowns of these investments, like digitalization, appliances? And how much of this spending is on the consumer side? Thank you.
I think there is another question in the front row.
Hi, my name is Ali Withers. I'm a freelancer for various media. So you have your targets to go from 2 to 4% of energy intensity improvement, but given how segmented energy efficiency approaches are across countries and industries, how do you measure and audit this energy intensity improvement, and how do you avoid greenwashing in these measurements?
Okay.
Good afternoon, Cezara Scutariu from Digi24, Romanian television. I have a question. What should European member countries, EU member countries, do in the condition of refusing imports of gas from Russia? What are the solutions?
Thank you.
Thank you for those. So everybody's energy bill is very high right now. You'll see in the detailed data, we put some ranges in depending on what you would guess that energy prices will be in 2030. But I want to say as well that this is a global figure. So a lot of people in lots of parts of the world, they're using a lot less energy than us, either because they can't afford it or they can't access it, and therefore their bills are a lot lower. So that amount of money represents a much more significant proportional saving in some parts of the world. And it accrues every year. That's the point, that people save their money every year, and you'd have to, it would take some time to break down the difference between what the saving might be in the UK versus Uganda versus Indonesia. But I kind of think that 650 billion saved every year is a decent enough prize to be chasing. But you're right, that efficiency is a tough enough sell often because it doesn't get governments perceive that it doesn't get citizens excited, though it does in these times. If you see, you know, there's a lot of governments 5 years ago weren't selling efficiency in a positive way, but now they're doing it in a kind of a catch-up way in terms of many European countries in just the last few weeks have announced campaigns to save energy or increase subsidies for home retrofit or things like that, because they realize in a negative framing, which we find ourselves in now, that efficiency can protect consumers from the kind of situation we find ourselves in. So it's a bit of a paradox because, like a lot of insurance products, we don't get excited about them until we need them, and you know that's a challenge for governments. Breaking down, it's a good question about the investment breakdown, and I can refer you, if you look at our net zero scenario online, it will break it down in those categories. If you have further questions, we can answer them, but rather than go through all the numbers now, that's broken down in broad terms in terms of who pays for what. And some of it's a question, and back to Anda's point, that if we want to upgrade homes, for instance, a lot of countries offer subsidies for upgrading homes, and a typical model would be that for richer households, there's a grant available of maybe 20-30% of the cost, and that's to incentivize people to take action. But for poorer households, maybe the state will pay for all of it. And as also as Anna said, there's models now we're seeing where maybe a pension fund will pay for it, or different models. So the question as to who pays is not settled. And it's an interesting policy one, because as I said earlier, efficiency is going to require a lot of investment, and I don't see governments being able to afford that in themselves, and that's why breaking open private sector capital to invest is really important, something we'll discuss tomorrow. How to measure intensity? Well, we're the IEA, we're the global repository of all energy data. So this is largely based on official energy data. So we get formal reports from governments around the world. We know how much energy has been used. We know sectoral breakdowns, and we know the GDP. So historically, you know, when we're estimating it for next year, the year after, it is an estimate, but historically it's based on global official data at a national governmental level. So I think it's pretty robust. Of course, it's something we keep an eye on in terms of the quality. And importing gas from Russia, just again, I would say we have been engaging, I'm going to assume the question is focused on Europe, and we've been working very closely with the European Commission in the last few weeks. You'll see on our website that we launched 2 10-point plans, one for how Europe could reduce its dependence on Russian gas by next winter, and we set out a number of measures that governments could take very quickly, and then we also had a 10-point plan for reducing use of oil and therefore dependence on Russian oil. And just recently we launched with the European Commission and other partners a campaign called Playing My Part to help citizens understand exactly what they can do. There's a range of measures from where we buy LNG to LNG terminals, but you'll see in all of those plans the demand side really features very heavily. So whether it's countries thinking about lowering speed limits or introducing car-free Sundays like many European cities have, measures that we can take to reduce oil. On the gas side, we noticed, for instance, that if you can have a public campaign, just recently launched, I can think of 2 countries straight away, Ireland and the Netherlands, where they had public campaigns to encourage people to turn down their heating a little bit. That saves a surprisingly large amount. If everybody in Europe turned down their home thermostat by just 1 degree, we'd save 10 BCM in a year, which is very significant. So there's immediate savings available on the demand side, but of course there's a lot available if we invest more structurally in more efficient buildings, more efficient heating systems, more efficient technologies. So we have set that out in a number of recent publications from the IEA, and we're working with governments directly now to help them enact those policies.
Thank you. Do you have any additional remarks?
Yeah,
please.
A quick supplement, I think, seen from the Danish perspective on sort of what would bring us to actually deliver on that. I think we do see the work in the Commission on the sort of the follow-up to the Fit for 55 with all of these new, where we are actually right now discussing within the European Commission what should be the target for energy efficiency be, and Denmark is pushing for 40%, and we clearly see that would be sort of a very strong way to deliver on some of that. And we do also see that the benefits for Europe would be quite large. So just to follow up on some of those questions, what would deliver that? That could be sort of a higher target at the EU level. And then, I mean, we also see this conference as part of that work, because they are discussing this right now, and some of the solutions that can actually deliver those 40%, they will be seeing them over the next couple of days. So we do think there's a sort of a nice connection between those two.
to be very specific, if the question was also going in direction of what could actually precisely be done, you know, what you can see today is if you take one technology across most of the regions globally today that is seeing a huge uptake over the few years coming, for example, heat pump technology, and that's not only from a private smaller home, it's also into larger system. As you get, you know, for every part of energy you put in, you get 3 times the heating out of the system. So it's a very efficient technology. So here you have one of the answers out of many that goes across more effective buildings. It could also be applying in Europe, for example, much more digital technology to make the buildings more intelligent, or it could be to drive district heating, district cooling. That is a much more effective way to heat and cool infrastructure.
Thank you. I think this concludes the time we have for this technical briefing. I'd like to remind everyone that all of the remarks made during this technical briefing are under embargo until 6 a.m. Paris time tomorrow morning. Thank you for joining us today, and that concludes our press briefing. Thank you.